Yep. Okay. Then let's make a start. Welcome everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Rebecca Bailey, the Programme Director of Towards a National Collection. And we're delighted to have you all with us this afternoon for our second webinar highlighting the progress of our foundation projects. All of our projects are over the 1-year mark now and all produced interim reports, poor things, right before Christmas. And we arranged these seminars to share the early results from 6 of the 8 projects, the ones that have been less impacted by furlough and other inconveniences of COVID, so the ones that have been able to keep going at pace. So we've got 2 this afternoon. We've got John Stack from the Science Museum Group going to talk about Heritage Connector, and Lora Angelova from the National Archives talking about deep discoveries. I should just point out we're live streaming on YouTube, and I think in addition this call is being recorded, so if anyone doesn't want to be seen, please keep your camera off. We're going to do the 2 presentations straight, one after the other, and questions after both. You're very welcome to turn your cameras off while the presentations are going. The default will be that you're muted. When we come to the Q&A, we're going to use an extremely simple system, and that's the chat box, and stick a Q in the chat box if you'd like to ask a question, and I will call upon you to unmute, stick your camera on, and ask your question. So very straightforward this afternoon. So I think I've covered all the technicalities. So what I don't know is who's speaking first. Is that you, John? Yes. So I'm going to hand over to John and let him screen share.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so hi, I'm John Stack. I'm the Digital Director of the Science Museum Group, and so our project is called Heritage Connector, and it is a collaboration between ourselves, the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, the V&A, and obviously funded through the HRC's Towards a National Collection Programme. So I'll go through a bit of who we are, then what challenges that we're trying to overcome, what we're doing, what we've learned so far, and then what we're doing next. So this is us, the kind of core project team, and there are other people working around the edges. So Talian Dutta, who is our research software developer, Rhiannon Lewis, our project coordinator, myself, Jamie Unwin, who's our technical architect for collections, Jane Winters from the School of Advanced Study, and Angela Wolf from the V&A. So our kind of core research question is, how can existing tools and methods be used to build relationships at scale between poorly and inconsistently catalogued and digitized collection objects and other content sources? So I think one of the key things in there to understand is these are like existing tools that we're customizing and working with, rather than massively building lots of new tools ourselves. But I'll talk a little bit more about what that customization and those methods are in a bit. So we, like a lot of other cultural heritage collections, are undertaking ongoing digitization of the collection, and like a lot of other people, the approach is really around breadth over depth, so getting as many records online, but not necessarily having the associated content as deep as you might like. And then, like everybody else, the primary way in which the content is discovered is by keyword search. And fundamentally what that's doing is it's taking keywords that are put into a search box and then running them over various fields in the collection catalogue, and then it's ranking those results in some way, and then and the ways in which it's ranked depend on different organizations and might take different things into consideration. For the most part, we, like others, forego a really granular advanced search, and the reason for that is, which might allow you to sort of put in place sort of combinations of keywords and filters and so on, because the collection catalogue is just too thin. And although there'd probably be few or no false positives, it's likely that an enormous amount of material that the user was searching for would actually be missed. So the approach that we've gone for, and like others, is a kind of single keyword search that searches across fields, and then there are kind of filters based on your search results that allow you to kind of drill down a bit. So there's a little bit of a kind of working with the data that we have and making the best of it, which means that fundamentally discovering the contents of the collection has a whole bunch of steps which have a whole bunch of problems with them at each point. So the first one is even knowing that the collection exists. The second is understanding that it might contain relevant contents, and our collection is actually extremely diverse, so there's lots of things that people are genuinely surprised that we have in our collection. Then there's knowing that that content is actually available online. Of course, not all of it is. And then once you get to our site, you've got to navigate this keyword-based search, and then you've got to kind of be able to make some sense of the search results and see how they're relevant for the thing you're potentially interested in. And then once you've got to the stuff, ideally you'd be able to like navigate from that stuff to related stuff. So fundamentally, search discovery is data-driven for us and for everybody else. But for the most part, the collection catalogue, ours and others, are quite unstructured. They're very variable in consistency in terms of just even how we have applied our own cataloging standards and how those have changed over time. And the collection catalogue is overwhelmingly composed of very, very thin records. It's also incomplete, and it's forever a work in progress. And then it contains all the kind of biases in both in content and emissions and cataloging and so on that you would expect. It's also structured in a very tabular format, and I'll come back to that in a second. So some of these things that you see on the left-hand side there on this page from our collection website are literally tables in our collection management system. So overall, I guess it's an okay experience, but we're definitely hitting as a sector, as an institution and as a sector, the limits of what we can do with collection data in these kinds of interfaces, and therefore the kinds of research, discovery, exploration, scholarship that you can kind of get out of the systems in this way. So often the conversation then turns to, well, we just need to like catalog everything in an incredible level of detail. And that's a much harder thing to scale up than it is imaging, because it needs kind of deep curatorial expertise. So that work is ongoing and it is prioritized, but it's the task of like decades, not years. And so there's ambitions for kind of rich discovery interfaces, or being able to kind of view collections by topics or themes, or being able to present the collection as a whole so that a researcher or a member of the public can kind of grasp what's there, are all really falling flat at the moment. And so in our first convening, one of the things we asked the public, the participants, was around the extent to which they were using external identifiers, which could then kind of build links between the collection and pull in more data to kind of potentially augment this. And 59% of them said the major hurdle was time and resource. And we've heard that. So it essentially comes to the same problem that we've had with improving the catalogue, is that it's a lot of manual labor. And of course, once you then start to apply you think about joining two or more collections together, the current approach of kind of keyword search actually risks providing an even worse experience, because the catalogue data and the approach taken don't align neatly. And a computer that's providing a search index does need them to be aligned neatly. So aggregation platforms like Art UK have to put quite a lot of energy and effort into aligning catalogues in order to join collections together. And arguably that's much simpler for an art collection than it is for a kind of multidisciplinary collection like ours or the V&As. Okay, so then our project is really looking at three things. The first is looking at knowledge graphs as an alternate way to capture and store and access the collection catalogue. The second is looking at linked data as a way to make that content interoperable, but also machine readable. And then it's looking at artificial intelligence as a way to generate the knowledge graph and the linked data. So in terms of like using these three technologies against sort of content-rich discovery systems, that's what these people do. You've probably heard of them. That's just how Netflix works, Pinterest, Airbnb, and so on. So it's a tried and tested method outside of our sector. And if we can get it right, there are probably some areas in which we'll see immediate benefits. So first of all, we could improve collection user interfaces. I think we're primarily talking about online. We can improve discovery because we'll have a kind of richer data set to work with. And then we'll improve links to other data sources, which means we can literally make links, but it also means we can draw the stuff from those links back in and put them alongside our collections. So a little bit on what we're doing to get into some of the detail. So this is like how collection catalogues exist, so within a collection management system. So when I say they're tabular, what I mean is it's like a big Excel spreadsheet with lots of interlinked cells, and cells can be full or they can be empty, but it's quite a sort of rigid format, and changing them is very complicated and tends to need to go to a committee. And they tend to be quite complicated to replicate online because fundamentally, if a cell is empty, there's nothing that can be queried against that cell. And in order to link to additional places and additional sources of potential content, which could be articles or it could be other collections and so on, you'd literally have to add other tables in. So what we've been looking at are knowledge graphs, and knowledge graphs are structured less as a set of like structured tables and more as a list of relationships between things. So the things that knowledge graphs do well is they can handle very complicated relationships of the kind that you find in cultural heritage collections. They can hold many different kinds of relationships. So a knowledge graph around a collection can actually hold more types of relationships than were represented in the structure on the left-hand side. They can calculate things like closeness and relationships very, very quickly. So you can do things like draw together related things. They can bridge across disparate kinds of content without the need to merge the data sets together. And then perhaps the key one is they're very flexible and they can grow and change very easily. So then the last thing is they can be machine readable. So the first line here is a human readable piece of text. The second line is a kind of description of what that text is. So the relationship with the second thing, and then the place in which they were born. And then at the bottom, you can see that that is a machine readable set of data. So I can very quickly look at everybody who has a birthplace or everybody who has any kind of relationship with Tonbridge. And that's the sort of thing that a knowledge graph can do very, very quickly and effectively, but where querying tables, as in the left-hand side, would be quite sort of slow and cumbersome. So then where does the artificial intelligence bit come in? So there's three parts to what we're doing to build this knowledge graph, or this kind of prototype knowledge graph from our collection and the V&A's collection. The first is looking at where there are existing identifiers and URLs stored in our collection management system. So those of you who are watching on Friday would have seen a presentation on persistent identifiers. Actually, one of the things that might come out of our project, spoiler alert for the final report, is actually anything where you've got a persistent identifier, or indeed any kind of link or identifier, is a really, really valuable thing. Even if a curator only has 2 minutes to stick that into a field somewhere, what this approach shows is you can actually build really quite impressive things on top of it. The second part is building links between our collection and Wikidata. So Wikidata is the data set that underpins Wikipedia, and part of the reason we're using it is, one, it's an open data set, so we can just like download the whole thing and play with it. Second is it's open licensed, which means that we can build on top of it without having to deal with rights issues. And the third is it covers a very broad subject domain, so we can sort of range very widely across different topics and subjects. And then the third part is building links from within texts using named entity recognition. So I'll quickly dig into each of these things, but fundamentally, what you should think of these things as is they're all forms of machine learning, and machine learning is really just about finding patterns. So we're using tools that are designed for finding patterns and things, and in some instances we can just use them right off the bat. In some instances, and I'll talk a bit about those, we're having to refine the tools and train them a bit ourselves, but we're getting some good insights into the kind of work that's involved in using artificial intelligence and these other techniques across heritage collections. So on the left-hand side is our collection data. We're running it through these processes on the left, and then we're building this knowledge graph that we're then using a bunch of tools to build links to Wikidata so that we can use that data set to both draw in data from there, but also use it as a kind of stepping stone to other places. So I'll go through each of the 3 steps that I described. So the first is around, this is kind of the simplest one, is just trawling through, finding links, seeing if we can resolve those links against Wikidata. And sometimes they're not even links to Wikidata, but using this technique, we can actually find, is that link also referenced somewhere else in Wikidata? And if it is, we can pull back the identifier. So very quickly, everything, and there was about 10,000 things in our collection which had a link which we could usefully use. And a lot of those things were just put into the system at some point, into the collection management system, not with this in mind, but just because that will be useful one day. And here we are, it was useful. So the second part is around building links to Wikidata. And so we built a tool that learns to distinguish between our internal records and Wikidata records and try and work out if those are the same things. Generally speaking, if we wanted to train such a thing yourself, you'd need really a large volume of data. And actually, although we think of museum collections as huge, they're not actually big enough in that instance. So we've selected a method which uses kind of less computational power and tries to then build these links and then put a kind of a percentage of certainty against it. So that's the second step. And then the third step is looking at records that have free text in them. So this is Helen Sharman's spacesuit. And you can see there's a whole bunch of text there. And so we can take that text and using natural language processing, we can start to go through and analyze the things mentioned in the text and trying to draw out specific things and build, but also to turn those into links. So in this instance, you can see that we've been able to build a link to Helen Sharman, and that's the top left one is an internal one, but those other ones which are around the mission, the company that produced, manufactured the spacesuit and so on, are not things that exist in our database. They're external things. They exist, and those QIDs are actually Wikidata IDs. So suddenly this has gone from just a raw piece of text, which a keyword search was kind of trawling through, to something where we now have links to those other things. And because we have links to them, we can see other things in our collection or anywhere else that also has other links to those things. We can also infer other information between those things. So we've been then looking at, okay, how do you make these things better? How do you constantly look at the results you're getting and then iterate through and try and improve the quality of the records coming back? So an obvious one is, and lots of people who've worked with museum collection data will know that a date is not a date ever, but they do follow a number of formats. So you can actually train a computer to recognize all the different formats that have been used for dates that have been used by curators over the years. So here's an example. We've written this, now it will go back in and it will be much better at identifying dates. Or the one that we found, that's the example at the bottom, is lots of things are person or place or institution names, the collection. And so seeing that as a pattern, we've gone back in and told the machine or trained the machine to recognize if something follows the name collection, that's an entity in itself. And then we'll be looking at actually how do you feed in all of the possible things that is a bulk way of helping the machine understand the kinds of entities that we'd want to add, and actually looking at the collection itself, those things are often contained. So one of the things that it's kind of stumbled over is names of companies, for example, are often people's names. So T Green and Son Limited. So the computer automatically jumps onto T Green and says that's a person, but the and Son Limited is the thing that turns it into a company. So actually having all of this structured information around names of people, name of companies, names of organizations, names of places versus the place name and the word company on the end, means that we can actually sort of ingest this back in and put it back into the process. And that significantly improves the link building capabilities. So fundamentally what we're doing is we're moving from something that looks like this, so the stuff in our collection with a relatively small number of links between it, to something that's much more richly interlinked and contains links to other places, and we can then build on top of that. So the preliminary findings from the first year, cultural heritage databases are rich, complex, large, and they have limited standardization. And fundamentally, standardization is really challenging because of the kind of culture and the resources needed. The motivations for working with linked data are around making the content more visible, exposing hidden or hidden aspects of collection, enriching them, as I mentioned, reading the data in different contexts, and providing better user experience. Working with linked data at any kind of scale is time consuming and resource intensive, which is why a lot of the projects that have worked in this field in the past have often been pilots, or they've either been pilots or incredibly well funded and collaborations between multiple institutions. So there are existing tools for doing this kind of work manually, but it takes a significant amount of time, and we've already been able to demonstrate that actually very quickly we can use some of the techniques I've described to build something really quite robust. We've been looking at what are the best processes for doing this, and actually using the tools iteratively has definitely been proven to be more effective than thinking this is a sort of run once approach. And so we're doing quite a lot of running things, looking at the results, changing it, running the thing again. And the more entities and relationships that we create, the better the system is getting at learning about our collection and learning about identifying the entities and building links with them. Building links to Wikidata is really variable depending on the type of thing. So it's quite good at people, companies, events and so on, but it's not very good at objects. We've only got a handful of objects that have one-to-one relationships in Wikidata. It's not a question of if human intervention in curation is needed, but at what point it should be used and where it should be focused. So I mentioned earlier that where curators had put links into the collection management system, we were able to use those very, very quickly. But at some point, human beings aren't going to need to be involved in this process. And that sort of should come as no surprise, because obviously the examples I gave earlier with Airbnb and Pinterest and so on, clearly there are people working behind the scenes making those things better all the time. So the things that we are working on next. So we're currently in the process of ingesting the V&A's collection alongside that of the Science Museum group, because then we can sort of present the two collections together, and we can see where links exist or don't exist or should exist between the two. We're looking to extend beyond collections and Wikidata to see about ingesting other kinds of text content. So can we scan other things, blog posts, articles, and so on, and start to put out entities that are mentioned there and build a link between those and the knowledge graph. We're going to build and test an internal link creation method. So this is fundamentally what we're doing, but we want to build something and package it up as something that could be repurposed again more broadly in the future. And then we want to explore the kinds of new forms of interaction and discovery, which in practice, this kind of approach could facilitate. Thanks very much. So we've got a project page, there's a blog, there's a very extensive Zotero library with many, many articles in it that we read. We've got a YouTube channel, and obviously there's a GitHub repository with lots of code in it. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, John. That was incredibly interesting. I remember many years ago campaigning within my own organization to have URLs within our catalogue, and I'm sure I didn't do it for this reason, but I feel smart now, so thank you. We're going to move on to Lora. I think Colin is going to control her presentation, so she will do some prompts throughout, but hopefully this is going to work.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And thanks, Colin and Rebecca. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of our project Deep Discoveries, which is looking at computer vision search for discovery of our national collection. Next slide, please. So before I get going with the actual project outline and what we're doing at the moment, I'm going to give you a bit of a background around visual search. So visual search is a method that uses artificial intelligence technology to allow people to search with the use of images rather than through the use of text. So for example, a user can take a photo or draw an object, use a computer vision search platform, for example, like Google Lens, which currently exists. And this platform identifies what is in the image and provides information to the user, usually in the form of similar or identical image results. Visual search is a type of sensory search, much like voice search, for example. And this type of searching avoids entirely the use of text-based searching. So you might be thinking of things like Google image search option, which nearly all of us have already used. But this again requires the user to input text into a search box and then to hit the image search button, which then finds images relating to that text input. As one of our survey respondents recently put it, visual search is, quote, quite a free way of searching. You don't need to use the correct language or terminology to find what you want. You can explore using visual language, end quote. So visual search works through a combination of computer vision and machine learning. Computer vision is a technology that essentially allows machines to see and to interpret what they're seeing. And it's something that's been around for quite a while now, but it's only over the last decade in what we call the deep learning revolution that it could be effectively applied to visual search. And machine learning methods essentially provide the information that computer vision requires in order to understand what's in the image. So this makes visual searching far more effective. Next slide, please. So I'm giving you an example here from the website called behance.net, which is a platform used by creatives to showcase their work, and it contains a very huge number of images. So our partners at the University of Surrey Centre for Vision, Speech and Signal Processing worked on the visual search capabilities of this website. So what you can see here is an image I've chosen by an artist called Torres Luna, called Dreams. And when you click on an image, on the very top of that picture, you see a little button that says more like this. So if you click on that button, next slide, please, you get a list of other images that have visual similarities to the input image by the user. So you can already see that at the top there, the first few images are actually by the same artist, but the rest of the images that are presented to us have visual similarity, whether that's based on their color or their composition. And the interesting thing is that the kind of technology is able to search across media types. So at the bottom, you see an image of a few t-shirts there, which is actually a photograph, but it has visual similarity to what the user initially searched for. So as a result, we felt that such a technology would be a hugely valuable addition for the Towards a National Collection program, since much of the content that's presented to users in digitized heritage collections is indeed visual, and we would like to be able to have users searching and discovering for new things in this manner. Next slide, please. So with that inspiration, we formed our project called Deep Discoveries. It's a collaboration between 4 core partners: the National Archives, the University of Surrey, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. We are lucky to have 3 project partners with us: the Gainsborough Weaving Company, the Sanderson Design Archive, and the Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture. And we have a user experience and software development research team, which is assembled from the National Archives and the V&A. And then we have a postdoc at the University of Surrey called Deepu Manantar. And we've recently just been joined by the Northumbria University School of Design as a contractor to help us in the final stages of the interface development, which I will touch on at the end of the talk. Next slide, please. So our project was only 15 months to begin with. It's now 18 months with an extension due to COVID. And we have 5 core objectives. The first is to develop a software platform that allows users to match content within and across collections, and which would enable visual searching of records based on aesthetic properties such as pattern, style, or other visual motifs. The second is to develop methods to survey current users of digital image collections in the UK, scope the real and perceived barriers to user access of these collections with regards to computer vision searching, and to find measurables that help us to assess whether such a technology would actually be helpful for people. And then we're also convening a number of workshops, surveys, and webinars alongside the project. We're helping to raise awareness of the technology in the context of kind of its usefulness for this program, in the hope that other discovery phase projects will continue to explore computer vision searching. And finally, we'll produce a report like all other foundation projects in the program. Next slide, please. We have a structure that is based around 2 work packages. Work package 1 is technology-related research, and that's really led by our University of Surrey partners, who are assessing the available technologies, designing backend algorithms, and also with the help of my colleague Rob Tubby at the RGBE. We're looking across kind of what is the current state of image collections with regards to their availability for computer vision searching. And then on the work package 2, which is user-related side, we have all the rest of the partners looking at kind of user experience questions and designing the front end and the user interface of the system. Next slide, please. There we go. Yeah, that's it. So we started out with a set of images from all of the core partners and our project partners, which totaled to about 17,000. And they were primarily botanically themed design images and specimens from the Botanic Gardens. And then we were also lucky to have a few of the other foundation partners, project partners, share images of their collections. So we have things from, I believe, the Science Museum and the National Gallery as well. So we have a kind of variety of themes and media types, from textile designs to paintings to flower specimens. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before I get into kind of updates on where we are in the project, I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into computer vision here, because it will be useful for what we're doing in a way. So prior to the start of the Towards a National Collection program, the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport released a report by the Collections Trust titled Mapping Digitized Collections in England. And in this study, the Collections Trust explored the potential of existing commercial image recognition and analysis tools like Google Cloud Vision and Amazon Recognition as a way to enhance the performance of a tool for cross-collection searching that they were kind of looking at exploring. So a mention was also made of Art.UK's collaboration with the Visual Geometry Group at the University of Oxford, where their work was looking at image recognition software to complement the efforts of human taggers in the creation of metadata for images. So this hints at an important distinction that I would like to make between the computer vision search methods that were described in this report and what we're looking at in our report. So the tools I just mentioned function by carrying out object classification tasks. So in effect, this is similar to auto tagging images with text labels. So if you submit an image of a cat, the software recognizes that it's a cat and then tags it with that actual semantic word. So they operate at a semantic level and tag what's in the image. So this is really useful for generating metadata about digital collections in an aggregator and for enhancing keyword-based searching, like I mentioned before. So the example I have here on the slide is actually from that report. It's an image from the Science Museum, appropriately enough, of Charles Darwin. And on the right side, you see a classification that was generated by the software, in this case, Amazon Recognition, as to what it thinks it's seeing in the image. And you can see it says like face, human, person, clothing, apparel, coat. And again, this is a useful task for helping to generate traditional image searching, which, as you'll recall, relies on text input by the user. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, this kind of search can be a little constrained by the types of terms that the system generates, the user's intent or their search task, and also in terms of course, the user's knowledge of the right term to search. So here's an example of the limitations of this kind of searching interface from a paper on machine learning in museum collections. The only facts in the metadata about the content of this image are that it's a plate and that it's inscribed with the words light dragoon. So if I, as a user, was searching using the term horse, I would not come across this collection item. Unless I think of all the words related to horse or dragoons, I would not see this collection item. So next slide, please. So we would like to explore something different in our project. The algorithms developed by the partners in Surrey for our project differ in two ways. The first is that they don't operate at a semantic level, but instead analyze the visual style or the aesthetic properties of an image. So things like pattern, color, style, or other visual motifs. And second, they don't classify or tag, but rather they use images as input and return similar images based on their style. So we can think of this as a ranking operation, like asking the computer to return a list of images ranked by relevance rather than a labeling operation, which is, again, like asking the computer to tag all the images containing flower in this case. So the search and discovery interface for this kind of algorithm would not rely on keyword searching, but rather image drag and drop, taking a photo, or even sketching by the user. So in this way, we thought that this would be ideal for heritage collections because it allows searching across different media and different styles and doesn't depend on metadata, which tends to be a problem for many collections. So next slide, please. A bit of an update on what is computer vision and how that works and what we're doing in this project specifically. So in modern computer vision, we use deep neural networks and deep learning methods such as convolutional neural networks to extract digital signatures or fingerprints from images. So we call this deep because we're applying several layers of convolution in the neural network, and we call it learning because given enough data and training labels, we learn the representation by training the network. So in convolutional neural networks, there are several layers of convolution. At the earliest layers, the system is responsible for learning what we call edges or blobs that are very low-level features of an image. And then as we go through higher levels, through a combination of these low-level features, we learn some textural features. And as we go through higher levels, the system learns some object parts. And then finally, it learns some meaningful semantic level labels that can help to classify or identify the objects in the image. Once trained, we can then extract some encoding or features from the image that can be used for image search or visual search. Next slide, please. And this slide shows a spatial network known as a triplet network, which is how we kind of train for visual searching specifically. And this is optimized for learning features, feature embedding or visual search. So we call this a triplet network because it has 3 convolutional neural networks in its architecture. And during training, what we're doing is presenting the network with 3 images. The first image is an anchor image or a reference image. And then the second image is what we call a positive image. It's visually similar to the anchor image. And finally, the third one is a negative image, which is visually dissimilar to the anchor image. So during the training process, we are essentially trying to pull the anchor and the positive image closer together in this low dimensional space, which is called feature embedding, whilst at the same time, we're trying to push away the negative image further in that space. And once we've accomplished that, we say that the system is trained and we can use this feature embedding space for image retrieval or visual searching using new images. Next slide, please. So this is how it works in our project. We've trained the system or the computer vision model using the triplet learning architecture that I just described. So as in the embedding space where we have closer points representing visually similar images and further points representing visually dissimilar images. And during the search, the user supplies a query image through the web interface, which connects the user's search engine. And in the background, we extract features from that query image and match the features to other features and images in the entire database. And then this leads to images that are then visually speaking nearest neighbors as a return query to the user. So next slide, please. In the project, we're exploring 3 computer vision models. The first is a visual style-based model, which is trained on a convolutional neural network of about 1 million images using that behance.net website. And it's trained to discriminate fine-grained visual styles. The second is a semantic model, which is based on the popular ResNet architecture, and it's trained on an ImageNet dataset using contrastive learning, and it can classify 1,000 object categories. And the third is a fused model, which is a hybrid of both of the above, taking the best of each one. Next slide, please. So here's a sample, very early sample query on the left, and then the 3 different types of models used to pull up images from our data set. And you can see that the images that are pulled up are different depending on whether the system is using a semantic search, a style-based search, or the fused model. So that's happening at Surrey at the moment. And in the meantime, work package 2, if you go to next slide, has been looking at a literature review of kind of anything related to computer vision search and image collections and how users tend to approach these methods. We've conducted in-depth interviews as well as a workshop and a follow-on survey. So, yeah, sorry. Next slide, please. Yes. The interviews that we carried out were with specialists from that deal with visual collections at different types of organizations. And we have a kind of anonymous online survey that asks users a little bit more about what they have used visual search for and what they find useful and what they feel that can be improved. And it was really refreshing to find that the responses from both types of approaches actually align really well. People find the technology useful for finding similar identical images, of course. They're using it a lot for tracing provenance and the origins of images, for checking infringement of their own images, for looking for higher resolution images, and then also for kind of discovery-driven searching or finding inspiration. So what we kind of divide these two into is kind of directed or motivated searching, where people have something specifically in mind that they're doing, a task, or more kind of browsing or discovery-based searching. And there isn't really a clear-cut boundary between the two. People often start out with a directed search and then find something interesting visually and then kind of go down rabbit holes of exploration. Next slide, please. So here's some data from our survey that's showing elements of visual search that users found most useful based on their existing experience with platforms like Google Lens, for example. And you can see that a lot of the respondents who had used such a platform were mostly interested in finding out who created an image, of course, looking for identical or similar images, but also people wanted to learn more about the images, like where or when they were created, by whom they were created, and of course, whether they could freely reuse them. We found this information very useful in terms of creating a cross-collection image search platform because it helps to inform the kinds of information that users would like to see accompanying the images on collection websites. Next slide, please. And from the free text responses in the survey, which we were actually really lucky to have a really nice amount of free text responses from people, we gathered that people found most useful in visual search aspects of discovery, the reliance on visual rather than semantic literacy, its ease of use, and the ability to trace provenance and get more information about an image. Next slide, please. So based on these kinds of activities, our UX research team put together a number of problem statements, which essentially help to frame questions that people have when they're carrying out searching. So for example, this problem statement is, as a designer, when I'm looking for source material for inspiration, I often struggle to frame a useful keyword query to search a graphic image collection. The scale of the collection also can be overwhelming, and I don't know where to start. I know what I'll like when I see it. So these kind of problem statements then help the team come up with potential opportunities to resolve these kinds of queries or problems, and then this will inform how to design the interface or like put together wireframes that have different kinds of functions and buttons that people can use to address their problem. So as you can see, the team identified some interesting opportunities from the surveys and the workshops in terms of what the front end or user interface could look like. Things like allowing the user to articulate visual attributes that they're specifically interested in having the search focusing on, or allowing the user to tailor follow-up pathways in their search based on specific attributes in the query image or in the results that are presented. Next slide, please. So in terms of creating visual search platform that would serve both directed and discovery-driven searching, it seemed that giving users the option to tailor what they're looking for based on specific visual elements, or what we call facets, would create an opportunity for interesting computer vision research and a challenging interface design question. Our survey respondents helped to hone in on some of the most important facets in terms of their searching using visual search platforms. So aside from things like subject matter of the image, people were also interested in color composition, pattern composition, composition of the shapes, and composition of the subjects. Next slide, please. And so the other thing that we found very interesting is that many people said that what they would like to be able to do when they're doing visual search is actually have more advanced filters or the possibility to narrow down on what they were searching for. So rather than just inputting the image and getting a number of results back, people wanted to be able to kind of select areas of the image or search more based on color composition or patterns or things like that. Next slide, please. Another thing that people highlighted to us in the survey was that they were interested in having more transparency in how vision search works and understanding how the system was finding similarity between their input image and the results that it was giving them. And presumably, again, this is because it would allow people to make their search more effective. People also found that there was a lack of associated useful metadata, as I mentioned earlier. And often images didn't lead them back to collections that they thought were trusted or trustful. Other users felt rather overwhelmed by the amount of information that they were presented with. So next slide, please. Okay, there's a bit of text on this slide, so if you just bear with me before we start reading this list of things. It's important to kind of talk about a caveat when it comes to training deep neural networks for visual search, which I mentioned earlier when I was describing how convolutional networks and deep learning works. I mentioned that we have to train the system using a positive and a negative image set. And this training requires someone to tell the system whether there is visual similarity between the query image and the positive image, or if there's visual dissimilarity between the two. So this, of course, brings in the possibility of introducing bias into our system based on who is training the system, what is visually similar and what is not visually similar. Within the scope of our project, we don't have the time or resources to carry out a study to see whether different users define color differently or define pattern differently or motif differently, and would in fact introduce this kind of bias or not. I mean, these are relatively abstract concepts. And so this presented us with a bit of a roadblock in terms of how we go forward in training our neural network. And so what we ended up is coming up with a list of things that we would like our system to do. And in discussions between the UX research team and the University of Surrey research team, we actually came up with a solution that is very interesting, I think, and bypasses the annotation problem altogether. So what we would like our system to be able to do is allow users to do directed searching. So for researchers who have something in mind specifically and would like to find an exact match, the system should be able to do that for them. We would like to have users have the option of discovery-driven browsing. So this presents users with collection items or their nearest neighbors visually and allows them to kind of click around and discover new things and new collections that they didn't know about before. We'd like to have a kind of faceted search where the user gets to select aspects of the image that they would like to search on. We would like to have the AI essentially self-explaining itself to the user in terms of letting the user know what parts of their query image it found similar to the results image, if a user wanted to know that. And we thought that what we could do is actually have this kind of iterative and interactive system where the user can essentially toggle visual facets both in their query image for the system to search on, but also in the results image. So once, if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so if you look at this graph here, like if the image has an initial query image that they put into the search engine, they're presented with the first retrieval results of several images. And if they look at one of these images specifically, in the top right-hand corner, what you see is a kind of very simple illustration where the yellow circles are essentially kind of telling the user what aspects of the query result image the computer vision found similar to their initial image. And the user can then tell the AI, no, actually, I don't think that I want you to search on this, or I do want you to search on this. And this kind of then feeds back into the search engine and does an iterative process until you have a refined retrieval result. This is quite complex, and it's not going to look like little circles on that picture. And it's not necessary that like we would be doing this for every image, but we would like to be able to have this as an option for users that do want to do this kind of thing. And it allows us to then essentially have the user training the AI on the fly to respond to their particular search task, which of course, again, will be very individual and unique to each user and to their search task. So if you go to the next slide, oh, it's missing. Maybe if you click again and again, it'll come up with the names. There we go. This is where we brought in the team at the Northumbria University. Colin, could you go back to the slide with people's names? There we go. Thank you. So because this is such a complex task and so many different things are required from the user interface, we brought in our design people from the University of Northumbria School of Design, Joe Briggs, Jamie Steen, and Andy Kane, who are helping us to come up with an interface that's going to be versatile and not so burdensome to users and intuitive in ways so that different users can access these different options to different levels. So for some users, you know, just putting in an image and getting images back is sufficient. But for other users, they would like to be able to do all this kind of faceted searching or interpretive AI situation. And so there's a lot of different things that we would like to be able to do and to present users with the ability to do without this becoming too cumbersome for them. So if you go to the next slide. Thank you. We worked with the team there. Again, they came up with their own problem statements, which in this case they're called themes and epics. So in this case, the theme is tracing provenance. There's a kind of problem statement and different type of user stories that are presented. And this helps the team to come up with different tasks that the interface has to be able to do to respond to that problem statement. And then this helps them with the design of the interface. So just on Friday, we had a meeting after 2 weeks sprint where they presented us with some of their first wireframes. And at this point, what they're able to do is kind of have the query side of things where the user can select different parts of the image to search on. and to be presented with a number of results. And now they're going to start working on the kind of retrieved image interactive aspect. So I'll just show you like 2 videos of what some of the ideas look like at the moment. Thanks, Colin. So this is kind of a regular website. You can kind of see an image. You can see information about that image in the collection. You can see similar images below. And then you can click on see more like this. And again, you'd be presented with visual neighbors. And you could go to this map option, which I really like this idea, where you're kind of presented with a map of different images in collections, hopefully cross-collection across our national network, of all sorts of visual neighbors to the image that the user is looking at. And then in the top right corner, you see a little box floating. This is an area where the user can essentially take a photo of something or upload a photo of something, and that map page would then be able to kind of refresh to give them visually similar images to what they're looking at. And again, within that box, they can then do things like cropping or selecting to search more on color, more on pattern, or maybe even more on semantic content. And if you go to the next slide, please, and play the video. Oh, I think it's there we go. Is this it? No, is it the next slide? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So here's kind of a wireframe demo of that. So here you would see the drag and drop image, or you can take a photo from your camera or upload an image from your own image library. And then you can kind of zoom into images on that image map and kind of get information, or even go to the website of the collection. And then you can also kind of drag one of the images from the map into your search box and have that become your query image, and presumably kind of get a refreshed map of newly visually similar images. And again, you can kind of crop on parts of that image or select different aspects of it to search on. You can bookmark images in your little collection, or you can do things like compare images that you're already kind of bookmarked or looking at, or do things like annotating. So again, these would be big dreams in the future, in combination with other kind of image-related discovery projects. So this is it at the moment. Thank you everyone for listening, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was absolutely fascinating. Totally brought it to life. So those of you on the Zoom call can ask questions simply by putting a Q in the chat box, and I'll come to you and ask you to turn on your mic and camera. Those of you watching on the live stream, you need to type your question in, and Colin will copy it into the chat, and we'll read it out and see if our speakers can give an answer. So thank you so much. Didn't even need to give any encouragement, and we go straight to Richard Light, please.
Hi, I've got a question for John. If he could kindly expand a bit. He mentioned towards the end that they're planning to create a link creation method for heritage data. And I would love to know a bit more about that, and the extent to which that might be of value to other organizations, smaller museums and so on.
Yep. So fundamentally, we're using a set of existing tools. And what we're finding is that in some places they're good at things, and in some places they're less good at things. And so there's some work that really takes those tools and makes them, I guess, stronger or more effective with cultural heritage content. And so what we're trying to do is to identify what those areas are, and then build approaches which can improve their effectiveness, but to try and do it in such a way that it's as small an amount of code as possible. One of the slides I didn't show was like, oh, we can apply that in 15 lines of code, for example. So it's less something that will be like a web page that you can just take your stuff to and ingest it, although there might be a bit of that, but it's more a set of methods. So I think the answer is you'll need someone with some level of technical expertise, but we're definitely not building this just for our collection. The idea is how broadly applicable is this approach. So we're going to look at the V&A's collection next, and then we hopefully will get on to bringing in some additional collections beyond that to show that this is broadly applicable.
Okay, right, thanks.
Thank you. Daria, do you want to comment on your first comment in terms of what your organization has to offer, and then ask the question to Lora?
Let me see if I can repeat. Yes. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. My first comment was about, I guess, offering a bit of help if organizations want to. I got quite excited hearing John's presentation and want to explore it better. I don't want to assume, I think a lot of people here probably know about Wikidata already, but if you don't, or if this sounded interesting and you would like somebody to hold your hand a little bit and explain the possibilities and maybe help a little bit with implementation, then this is something that we might potentially be able to help with. And I'm glad to see John nodding gently, because we are supporting them. And my email is in that first comment. And my second, my actual question was just, my question, I suppose, will show that I know very little about all of this, but for me, the exciting thing is kind of like related search and new connections and things like that, but I do struggle sometimes to really see what the use case is. And what I understood from your presentation is that it is really a minority of people that use it in this sort of way, like, oh, let's see what connects. It's more about, I want this information, I want more information about the image that I have in hand. And I guess my question was like, is that right? And do you think there is an emerging or a more popular use case for offering people those novel connections beyond, I think, the example that was shown, like, I don't know, textile artists or things like that. And yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so no problem. I think to a large degree, the responses to the interviews and the survey are very much based on who responded to these things. So our initial workshop and our initial interviews were carried out with collection image experts and designers. And so, of course, most of them were actually targeted search applications. Many of the designers, many of the people working with these kinds of systems wanted to either find something specific and similar to what they had started out with, or find out provenance of things, or check for infringement things. However, I think from users, the survey came back with about 220 responses so far, which is a good amount, but it's still quite low. And of course, it will depend on who responded. So we started out by asking project partners to send out the survey, and we've posted it to a number of lists, but I suspect that a lot of the people responding to this kind of thing will be skewed towards people who are already using this technology in their, for example, in their work, which seems to often require kind of targeted searching as well. I think that, in a way, there is a case to be made for, how do we engage audiences? How do we let people know that these things exist and they can just go there and browse the collection? And I think that's a challenge for many organizations that goes beyond this project and beyond this program, probably. I mean, as a user, I don't kind of often just go on the Rijksmuseum website and start clicking around.
Exactly.
So that's a bigger problem, I think. But I feel like actually, if you had this opportunity to discover things across collections in different areas, that you might already go to places like the V&A's website for image searching. And in our survey, we did ask people whether they do searching for visual inspiration, and most of our respondents said yes. And they said that they go to specific websites, specific places they already know of, like museum collections, gallery collections, or places like Pinterest or Instagram, and then kind of click through through there. So I think people do this, but yeah, again, the engagement is another big problem.
Right.
Searching for visual inspiration, it often appears in like fine art and art museum websites. It's quite significant. It doesn't appear in ours, obviously. It ought to, but it can be like 15-20% of the users. I think the other really fascinating thing about your presentation was the people wanting to take like a detail of something and
yeah,
use that as the basis of search.
One of our use cases actually that the Northumbria team put together was kind of especially thinking about the National Archives collection. Maybe somebody who's found a medal in their house that was given to their grandparent. They wanted to know if this medal was like important and kind of connecting different things to this medal. So taking a photo of that image, then being able to crop out specifically to that medal, then seeing images that contain similar medals would lead them to places, not just with kind of photographs, but also potentially historical information about this collection item. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to come in on your comment, or are you happy just to have recorded it? Oh.
Yeah, no, I didn't have a question. It was just to endorse what the speaker was saying. I found your presentation incredibly useful, also for future research that I imagine in the future, scholars where we've been trying to identify the hand of an artist or a school of artists for non-European collections, so colonial collections. To be able, we're doing this manually, you know, going around the world and looking at things. So this has enormous potential. Thank you.
Let's hope we can go around the world again and look at things at some point. You know, as much as we all love the digital, let's get out there at some point. Okay, I'll call upon Carlotta, who's part of the TaNC team, see what she wants to know.
Yes. So hi both, thank you for the great presentations. So I think it's a follow-up question, Daria's question about the sort of use and potential uses of your approaches. And John, I guess this one is more for you. What are the contexts that you envision in which the Heritage Connectors data might be used? So if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely can. We're actually writing a blog post down at the moment, and now I'm just going to pull up the draft.
Okay, I read your mind.
This looks like a fix.
So I'm working with Jan and Lewis on a blog post looking at use cases. So I'll quickly whiz through that, and then you can read all the detail when we finished it. So one, there are multiple layered tasks. And we think it from searching all the way down to finding related stuff and so on. And we think it has applications at all layers. So one is like clearly improved search results. So the example I showed with the spacesuit and the company that had made the spacesuit, but which wasn't recorded, was recorded in the free text description, but wasn't recorded in the actual catalogue data field. And so being able to pull all of those out and join them together, clearly immediately you get much better search results. But you can also then go to Wikidata, pull in stuff from Wikidata, which are additional fields and things that exist on those pages, and ingest those into the search index. So there's clearly something around just like more stuff in a search index that improves search results. There's something around kind of macro views of entire collections. So being able to very quickly see like the whole collection and the kinds of things that it contains. So that if you're a researcher and you're sort of scanning across lots of areas, you can see, okay, so I, for example, know that about a quarter of our collection is a medical collection, it's medicine, and it's very historical. It goes all the way back to ancient civilizations. We probably say that in a sentence on our website, but looking at our collection website, you have no idea what's in there. And so actually some of the things that Lorna showed, which are kind of like visual maps of things, you could imagine, and ours might be less with thumbnails and might be more with like keywords, a way of getting a grip in 30 seconds on a collection, which is like really difficult now, and then joining two collections together and then saying, okay, to what extent do these overlap or complement each other? So that's the second one. Something around filtering and sorting. So there are filters on our website, but you could add more dimensions for filtering and sorting. Going back to the conversation we were just having, there seems to be a fourth thing around serendipitous discovery. So finding things that you weren't otherwise going to expect to find. Because curators in the collection management system have made a certain number of collections and they put the same thing in multiple fields and join things in certain ways, but the computer can do it in other ways. So for example, in a way that with Lorna's work, you might discover a particular flower, then made its way onto a textile and then onto a wallpaper or whatever. There might be something similar in our approach, that you would find unusual links between things, and you might find those in different ways. So we've been doing quite a lot of reading around serendipitous discovery in heritage collections. And then think about new entry points. So topics and themes are are things that people put into our search box, not just in our collection, but actually all over our website. But actually the way that the collection is catalogued, the kind of groupings, some of them are very good and quite meaningful, and some of them are very, they're really like internally focused, or they've just existed in the system probably since it was ledgers and index cards, and so they're not that meaningful and useful as entry points. So we use some of them online, but quite a lot of them we don't use. But building a sort of network of knowledge, you could actually cluster together everything that was related to a place, an event, etc., and create new entry points. And that could be good for researchers, but it can also be really good for educators, for example, at all different levels. And then the kind of last one is around kind of richer onward journeys. So we could show from an object page or group of objects who else held those objects in their institution. And so the collections start to feel slightly less like little islands in the sea, and hopefully a bit more like an archipelago with a ferry service. And then I guess one of the last one, number 7, would be looking at kind of new forms of interface. So when we put our collection online, we were really keen of like, oh, could we do a map? Could we do a timeline? Could we create something that felt much more sort of like you were getting into the collection in a way that was not based on search? So sometimes you hear this referred to as generous interfaces. Lots of writing on it. That's worth reading. And actually what we found was our collection catalogue doesn't support that level of interface, because the data, it would actually just amplify how bad some of the data was. When I say bad, I just mean like incomplete. I don't mean it's bad. It's good, but it's very, very patchy and incomplete. And I think that's, so yeah. So those are the sort of 7 areas we're looking at.
And that's excellent. Thank you.
You didn't expect that, did you,
Carlos? I didn't. I was well prepared, wasn't I?
So we agreed on this.
Right, Carlotta, go away and think of something equally hard for Lora that she just happens to have already written a complete thesis on. In the meantime, Matt Whitby, do you want to come in on false positives?
Yeah, I think it was John that had the example of the astronaut, and it linked through to a specific person. I just wondered, when you have lots of documents with John Smith's in, for example, does your system deal with the kind of overall context of the piece of text and work out which John Smith it would be?
Yeah, it tries to. There's actually some really interesting work done by the National Archives on exactly that question, which is worth reading. What was it called? Traces Through Time was the name of the project. It was specifically looking at biographies, meaning people records, and machine learning, trying to identify people in different areas. So, so there's a notion of in computer generated discovery and machine learning of, I forget what it's called. Oh, it'll come to me in a second. Anyway, there is capturing. It's like you're capturing all of the cats, but you've got a few dogs in there. Mm-hmm. And then there's like you've only got cats, but there are some cats outside, so you sort of missed some things. So one of the questions is around, is it preferable to have a few false positives, but to know that you've got all of the positives that you'd actually want? And our working assumption is it's better to have a few spurious results than it is to have missed some things. because actually the job of researching precision versus recall, thank you very much for Richard who put it in the chat. Our working assumption is it's better to have a few erroneous results than it is to miss some things.
So it's better to let the dogs loose with the cats.
Yeah, I've got a dog and a
miss
cat.
some cats, right? Okay. Anybody else?
Because the job of the researcher is to work through the results, ultimately, yeah.
Okay. Would anyone else like to come in with a question? I have to say you're being rather quiet compared to the audience we had on Friday. Let me just see what's just... Thank you, Richard. Please come in.
Right, hello again. Well, to continue that conversation, John, there's, I think, an interest in the extent to which existing authorities that museums use are things like nomenclature, art and architecture, thesaurus, you know, the sort of structured frameworks which you tend to use to inform your cataloguing work. I mean, to what extent could those potentially give you a shortcut into a linked data universe where you're actually sharing stuff more effectively?
Yeah, definitely. And so it's similar to the point, we're just at the point where we're using our own site, our own catalogue record as a kind of controlled list that we can say these are real things that have been checked by a human being. So controlled vocabularies and thesauruses are definitely useful. Clearly, obviously, that's not what they were originally created for, but being able to like use those as when you see these 5 words together, that is the name of that company.
Yeah, and I was thinking particularly in a sort of cross-institution context, because obviously we're talking about towards the national collection.
Yeah.
And, you know, certainly one of the things that was evident from, say, the British Museum's massive investment in linked data was that they very much created a silo. They basically had their own framework of concepts, and they invented URLs for all of those, and it was all beautiful linked data, but you couldn't get out of it. You know, you couldn't point out from there or into it in a way that actually melded their knowledge of the universe with anybody else's. So I think, you know, finding those sort of common frames of reference, and particularly ones which are sitting around already being used by the sector, I think might well be a constructive way to actually make better progress than each institution inventing it for itself from the ground upwards.
Definitely. We've been looking at things like Grace's Guide, which is a industrial history.
Sorry?
We've been looking at something called, for example, called Grace's Guide, which is like an industrial history gazetteer.
Right, yes. No, these sort of authorities that sort of on the margins like that, they're interesting. And the challenge really is that it's nobody's job to actually take those resources and make them into a really useful linked data authority. And again, we were mentioning about disambiguating John Smith's. I mean, obviously you've got resources like WikiTree, which is a web-based authority for genealogy, and you know, to some extent that's very much for ordinary family historians, and it's quotes ordinary people rather than quotes notable people, but nonetheless the fact that you actually have metadata in there allows you to disambiguate people by date of birth, appearance in a census or whatever, which again could be a valuable resource for us in the museum sector.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll go to Nick, and then I'll read yours out for you, Fiona. So Nick first.
Hello. I just better say I'm from the Science Museum as well. Disambiguation is something that library cataloguers have been doing for years within authority control. In fact, before I went to the Science Museum, I was at the British Library in its authority control section doing just that. But we have different data sets it's not just the museum database, but also the archives catalogue and the library catalogue, all using different authorities and different approaches to authority control and structuring the data. Do you think that the artificial intelligence method that you were talking about could actually merge these together in some sort of way on that public-facing interface without having human intervention to actually check through it all?
Yeah, that's the idea. I think the answer is up to a point, and what we don't know is where is it best to put the human intervention in, and what things is it good to put around it to make the computer better.
Because if we're ingesting data from different sources, we need to do as much disambiguation as we can. Of course, you'll still have a high recall, but we want to make the researcher give them the tools to have a precise search experience as they can.
Okay, before we go to Fiona's question, if anyone's watching on the live stream, you need to type your question in and Colin will then ping it through to us. So if anyone's on the live stream, please, you can ask questions too. So Fiona's not got a working mic this afternoon, so she's got a question for Lora saying, what level of granularity might the search get to? E.g., could it be trained to differentiate between two botanical illustrations?
Yeah, hi Fiona, thanks for your question. So I have to caveat this with the fact that my technical expertise on this project is incredibly limited. But as far as I understand, visual search can find identical images and it can be trained to be very effective at finding visual similarity on a very fine grain level, as long as there's a big enough data set and enough kind of training is done. So in this case, I guess you would, if we are using our system, you would have to have the user kind of tell the system, yes, this is correct, this is what I was looking for, or not, this isn't correct. I would like you to focus more on this aspect of the flower or this aspect of the leaf of this plant and not so much that part. So in a way, it should be able to recognize between two different botanical illustrations of the same plant, or yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Carlotta, have you got anything else devilish to ask that they have a excellent answer ready?
Not devilish, sorry. But Laura, just one thing, you mentioned that you are surveying the digital objects of collections, and because I'm assuming that it will have a huge impact on the different results of your search. So can you already say something about that, or is it going to be a huge problem if there are not enough digitized collections?
Yeah, so this work is ongoing at the moment. I don't have any results to share with you yet, but yeah, I think a large part of the issue is probably that, you know, we need to digitize more stuff, and there's an aspect where, you know, users, when they search across visual collections, get this idea that this is representative of everything that's there, where it really isn't. And some users already find that overwhelming, and some users find that they're not able to find the thing that they want to find. And so, yeah, balancing that information in allowing users to understand that what they are able to access is, you know, a minor amount of what's out there. And many collections, and especially smaller organizations, are only starting now to embark on this process altogether. So coming up with some methodologies or standards, or letting people know the kind of information that users are interested in having alongside the images, and, you know, kind of minimal resolution requirements, all of this kind of stuff would be, I think, valuable for a lot of smaller organizations that are embarking on this journey now.
Thanks.
Thank you. Tim Boone, do you want to come in?
Yeah, really a question from my past. I used to be a curator in the Wellcome Medical Collections, and we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of pairs of forceps. When we were cataloguing these things years ago, we used to go to the suppliers' catalogues and try and match up the pairs of forceps with the pictures in the catalogue to find out what kind they were. Do you think the tools you've already developed would allow those sorts of associations to be made?
Sorry, was this a question for me or for John? I missed it.
For Lora.
Okay. So whether there's enough kind of ability in the system to do the recognition between the images you have in a collection and another collection?
Between actual objects
Oh.
and etchings or engravings of those objects.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So if somebody takes like an image, like a picture of an actual object, and then whether that would be able to find a visual similarity between that and the object in another media.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're still kind of playing around with this. I think I haven't seen, so this is the thing, our image set is relatively small, and we have a lot of textile pattern designs, and then we have kind of botanical representations, and then we have a variety of different other media types like paintings and design objects from the V&A. And I'm finding that so far when I play around with the prototype toy interface, I put in a textile pattern and primarily I get returns of textile patterns. So it seems to be, of course, finding the best similarity, and that tends to be in other textile patterns. But sometimes you do then come across things from the Botanic Garden collection and the other collections. So I think it's, again, I think it's partly the data set we have and partly that we haven't started doing this kind of iterative annotation training. But in theory, that would be the ideal scenario, and that's what we're striving to accomplish. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Great. We've got a couple of minutes left if anyone's got a final question. Either of our speakers like to ask each other something? If not, Carlotta's ready with one more. Okay, it's you, Carlotta.
I guess it's again about accessibility, this time not about the kind of digitized objects, but accessibility for perhaps users with disabilities, especially if you're using images. So if you are considering your tools in that aspect as well, so how are you addressing this, either or both of you?
For our collection image search, I mean, this is definitely something that I will be touching on in the report. It's visual search, and so it depends a lot on vision. And so I was thinking a lot about things like image identifiers that go along with kind of, if you go on Instagram, a lot of people now put on descriptors for their images. And again, things like if you're doing drag and drop or things like that, that requires you to be able to use certain types of systems or certain ways of working with the technology. So we won't have the capacity to be addressing particularly these aspects within the project, but I will be describing them in the report and saying, you know, this is something that we have to be aware of. And this will definitely allow users with specific disabilities to maybe have less access to these systems. So we need to find ways to be able to offer them the same experiences.
Thanks.
John, anything to add from your project?
No, I don't think so. So
Okay.
one of the questions that's coming up for us thinking about users is around, and it's actually in the trace, so it's not directly an accessibility question, but it is a question around usage and then user needs, is how best to present this machine generated content to users. Because I think if a curator writes something that's come from some particular place, and that's what people expect. They expect the provenance is a curator or a collection management person or registrar or whatever. But if it's generated by a machine, I think you need to be quite explicit to the end users that's where it's come from, and therefore the provenance of machine generated data and how it's presented to users and the language that's used, and if is really, really important. The Traces Through Time project, there's a little bit in their report around the kind of language to use about machine generated linkages, which is worth looking at. But for example, there's been there's a bit of criticism of the Google Knowledge Panel, which is when you search and the thing that appears on the right hand side, and it's got like, you know, you search for a record company and it tells you the city it was made or whatever, and the people involved and so on. But the provenance of that data is not well it tends not to be represented very well, and so it's not very transparent about what's going on. And actually, transparency feels really important. Probably more from my project than Laura's project, but I think it's probably going to be an emerging research question in this next bit.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, I'm going to have to wrap this up, I'm afraid. There's a couple of things in the chat, but the speakers can have a look at that. This is, as I said at the beginning, the second of a series of 3 webinars highlighting 6 of our foundation projects. Colin's put in the chat the detail of the third one, which is the same time as today and on Wednesday, and with our final 2 projects. So we'd be delighted if you could join us then and hear more about what our teams are doing. But for now, let me just thank the speakers very much for sharing their projects and for stirring up some very interesting conversations. This is definitely not the end of the road. This is the start of a journey. And that's been incredibly interesting to hear everyone's point of view. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for our speakers.